Hi there, my name is Dermot O'Connor. I'm a lecturer on the BSc Honours in Software Systems Development. Now, unfortunately, I missed the Zoom meeting earlier in the week where some of my colleagues outlined the modules that are available on the fourth year program. So I just want to kind of complete the picture and talk to you a little bit about two modules that I'm involved in. So the two modules concerned are Web App Development 2 and Agile Software Practice. If you do by any chance need to or want to contact me after this video just to get some other details, then my contact details are at the bottom of the screen there. Feel free to email me. So let's talk about the Web App Development 1 module first. Just a tiny bit of background. When you're developing a web application, there are essentially two architectures or models that you can adopt, called the server-side rendering approach or the client-side rendering architecture. You may not have heard of these terms, but you've actually used one of them already. The first one there, server-side rendering, that was essentially the architecture that you were using when you were developing web apps in the Web App Development 1 module. I think that might have been in second year, I'm not sure. And that was the original architecture. But there is an alternative, and it's the alternative that we're going to be looking at in this module. The alternative is more recent. Now, by recent, I mean it's been around for about 10 years or so. And it's very different in terms of how you structure your application and in terms of how you develop it as well, I guess. So we're going to be focusing on the client-side rendering or the CSR architecture. And what you would notice in that type of web application is that there's a very clear separation between what we call the front end and the back end of the application. They're essentially almost two separate applications that talk to each other. And in this module, we will be developing both the front end part and the back end part. We'll actually also add in a persistence layer. By that, I mean a database. And just to keep it interesting, the database won't be your standard kind of relational database, which you would be very familiar with. We'll actually use a non-relational database, more than likely MongoDB. The module is very much kind of development oriented, which I think is really important for any undergraduates. The more development experience you get before you go out into the big wide world of industry, the better. And so the module is 100% CA in terms of assessment. What technology stack will we be using? Well, for the backend, we're actually going to be using Node, which you're familiar with, coupled with a framework called Express. I'm not sure if you used Express in Web App Development 1, but if you did, even if you did, the way we'll actually use it will be very different to how you would have used it before. And essentially, in the backend, what we kind of, from a technical point of view, what we will be developing is what's called a RESTful Web API. On the front end, we'll be using a framework called React. The type of application that you're developing in the front end is often referred to as a single page application. I know these are all very technical terms and I wouldn't be worried about them, but just to give you the full picture, or to allow you to Google if you want to. But the framework of the technology that we will be using for the front end development is React, and it's pretty unlikely that you would have actually used that, although you may have Googled around and played with it. For the persistence layer, as I said, we will use something called MongoDB. Now, in terms of coding, it's going to be all JavaScript, both front end and back end. So that's nice that it's only one language to cover all of it. We're going to assume that you're very familiar with HTML and CSS, even though HTML and CSS are obviously going to be part of any web application, but you won't learn anything new as such on that aspect of it. The coding side, I suppose, will be, you have done JavaScript already. We know that. We will spend the first week, though, just doing a quick refresher on JavaScript, just to get you back up to speed. In the labs themselves, what you'll actually be doing is developing a client-side rendering structured web application. So you'll be kind of incrementally rolling it out from week to week. And so essentially what you'll finish up with, if I could just flip over to my browser because I've loaded it already just to give you a sense of it. You develop this application. It's kind of an application that a movie enthusiast might use. So there's the home page, and it shows me a list of movies. These are actually very much up to date. These movie details are being pulled from a web service that's openly available. So if you're a movie fan, which I'm not particularly, but if you are, you will actually notice that these are very current movies. And this actually changes every time you run the application from week to week anyway, or month to month. So these are real actual movie titles. And what we can do is we can click on any particular movie and we get some more details on that movie, an outline of it, and some facts and figures about it. We can click on reviews here and we get a list of actual critiques that have been written, and we can go into any one of them and get the full review, I think, yeah. So all of that stuff, we'll be developing all of that. Now, all of this data, if you like, as I said, is real data coming from a real web API that supplies information, up-to-date information on movies. All the things we'll be able to do with our application is we can tag movies as being favorites of ours, Maria. So I might pick these two as favorites, and I've got a separate page here where I can just see my favorites, and I can write my own review on a movie. Going back to the home page, I can do the usual kind of stuff. I can filter this because there's about 20 movies here, and there are more available to me if I want to. So there's pagination in there if I want to, but I can filter the movies based on some sort of genre. So in the labs, what you will be doing is, and the labs are very prescriptive. So it steps you through developing this application from week to week. And then the idea is that you might take that and extend it a little bit further in terms of an assignment, but let's not worry about that for now. So that's the web app development 2. The second module then is Agile software practice. This is a little bit trickier to explain, but I'll do my best in explain in a short period of time anyway. So when it comes to kind of developing applications, whatever the nature of the application is now, whether it be a web application or whatever its nature is, as I said, there are, in very general terms, there are 2 methodologies or processes that you can go through. The waterfall approach and the agile approach. I would say you've probably heard of both of these as well. These are very broad level categorizations now, but so the waterfall approach is all characterized by lots of paper-based designing up front, implementation, and then lots of testing at the end. Whereas the agile approach takes a more incremental, iterative approach towards software development. And as is evidenced kind of from the module title, we are focusing on the second of these 2 approaches in this module. Waterfall has been around for a long, long time. Agile is more recent. Now by recent, I mean maybe 15, 20 years, but and it's probably fair to say that Agile is by far and away the dominant software development methodology being used in the industry today. And that's not really going to change. Let me tell you, we're not going back to a waterfall world. So in terms of this module, now, from what I've said so far, you might think it's going to be quite theoretical. It's going to be anything but. It's going to be very, very practical based. But just to continue the story, what I'm showing you here in the middle is the kind of the process that you as a software developer would experience if you were part of a software development team that was following this agile approach. So if you can imagine you're a software engineer, you're part of a large software development team, it may actually be co-located, the team could be distributed globally. You've been assigned a task, you've got to implement, let's say, a piece of functionality or extend an existing piece of functionality or fix a bug. Either way, you've been assigned some sort of task to do some implementation. Maybe it's 2-3 week period is kind of the ballpark of the time frame available to you. And so you're doing your implementation locally. And as you are doing your implementation, obviously you're testing your implementation to make sure what you're doing is working. So that's what I mean by testing locally here. Eventually, you will want to integrate your completed code with the rest of the code base as it stands to date. So you move on to integrating your code, and that simply means at one level, adding your code to the overall project code base, which is still growing. When you do that integration, you want to make sure that the code that you've added hasn't broken anything else in the application. So you need to do some more testing. And assuming it hasn't, then you would want to deploy your application to somewhere on the cloud so that the rest of the team can now actually, if they want to, kind of play with the application to get a sense of it. Or maybe even the client that you're developing the application for, they may actually want to be able to see what's the current status of the application that you're developing for me. They know it's not going to be complete, but they want to be able to exercise it and maybe give some feedback. So that's what I mean by deploy privately over here. It's not available to the customers yet. And eventually then you come into what I'm calling deploying it in a production environment so that it is fully available to the users and it's being used by whoever the user base is. So these kind of tasks here of testing locally, integrating your code, testing your code in the larger code base, deploying it privately, and even deploying it into a production environment. These are all tasks that are part of the everyday work of a software engineer. They're not just writing application code, they're doing all of these things as well. And these things are very time consuming. So a key kind of tenet of the Agile approach, because this stuff is going on all of the time. Every software engineer is doing this all of the time. A really important thing is that these things need to be automated. We don't want to have to do them manually, because if we have to do them manually, it's going to be very time consuming. And usually something is going to be skipped. Typically testing, actually, you might make some shortcuts. So we want to try and automate as much of this process as follows. And by automation, we mean we need to have tools available to us that do a lot of the work for us, subject to our configuration and other stuff as well. So that's where this module comes in. We're actually going to be looking at a subset of these tools so that you have a sense of what is available to the modern software engineer. So the big emphasis on getting practical experience of using the tooling associated with all of this. So it is also, this module is also a 100% CA module. So the tooling, like we're talking about testing tools, what you actually do is, as well as writing your application source code, you actually implement your tests as code as well, which is a very kind of interesting experience and very different from what you might be used to. So you essentially kind of have two volumes of code that come with any application, the actual source code and the testing code. Secondly, I'm talking about version control tools. These are tools that help us to manage who has changed what file and when. Because as you can imagine now on a large software development team, there's lots of source code files and testing code files. And anybody really is allowed to change any files they want to. That's kind of the nature. You've got to allow that flexibility. But if somebody by accident introduces a bug into the source code or indeed into the test code, we'd like to be able to track when that bug was introduced and who carried out the changes so that we can try and identify what caused them. So that's kind of almost a file management thing, but extremely important given the frequency with which code is being added to our growing project. So version control tools, essentially Git and GitHub. You may have heard of GitHub. That's what we're talking about there. Continuous integration tools, continuous deployment tools, they help us with those parts of the process that I showed you there on the previous slide. These are essentially kind of cloud-based or web-based tools that you can configure. And so we'll see how we do that. So that's what this module is focused on. And because Agile software practices are always in the context of some sort of software development project, then what we actually do is we align what goes on in this module, the Agile software practice module, with the work that you will be doing in the web app development 2 module. Okay, so almost, well, I'm involved in both of those modules, but even when I wasn't involved in both of them, we tried to coordinate what goes on between those 2 modules so that one kind of supports the other, if you like. So that's Agile software practice, and that's really as much as you need to know at this stage to give you a sense of the kind of material covered in those modules. So again, feel free if you wish to email me if you want to contact me about any aspect of either of those modules. Okay, thanks for now.